Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the November Transportation Librarians Roundtable, our second to last here in 2014. I want to thank you all for joining us today. We have a wonderful presentation planned ahead. For logistics and audio issues, this meeting is being recorded. If you are participating through the telephone versus your computer audio, please click the green speaker button at the top of your screen. That'll help prevent echoing throughout the session.
Do you
you press *6 to mute and unmute yourself as well. To introduce our speaker, Amanda Holland, she's from the Alaska Department of Transportation and Public Facilities, and she'll be presenting to us on the topic of generations in the workplace, particularly in transportation. We're really excited to have her. Just a little background. Amanda Holland serves as the Deputy Director for Administrative Services in the Alaska Department of Transportation and Public Facilities. While she wears several hats at work, one of Amanda's favorites is leading the department's workforce planning program. You'll hear that today in her presentation. Currently, she is piloting a custom leadership development program and delivers courses designed to make work life a little easier whenever her schedule allows. Amanda holds a bachelor's degree in industrial and organizational psychology from Macalester College and is presently working on her Master of Science in Organizational Leadership. She has been a national presenter at the Transportation Research Board, National Transportation Workforce Summit, ASTRO, National Association of Government Communicators, National Society
want me to just start talking? Are we doing any kind of an introduction
Human Resources
to start
Management. On a personal note, her favorite pastime is hiking with her family.
We have quite a bit of, and what we're finding is that the generations are really changing the way we interact in the workplace. And so, Amanda, if you want to move to slide 2, you should see one called Generation Basics.
Amanda, whenever you're ready.
Two really.
So I really want to thank you for inviting me to speak today. I appreciate the opportunity to share what I've learned about generations in the workplace. And I think that knowing more about generations in the workplace is a really valuable tool for us today. For the first time in history, we have 4 generations in the workplace, and actually we almost have 5. We've got a few of our 5th generation starting to work. And what we're finding is that with that many different generations in the workplace, we are seeing some conflicts and also some opportunities that we haven't seen in the past when we look at the workforce in general. And so an awareness of the makeup of the workforce is critical for success in the world of work. And I really think that the generations is an important part of that successful knowledge about the workforce. So if we go to slide 2, I want to share with you some generations basics that I think are really important to bear in mind when you are looking at generations and how they might be affecting your work experience. The first is that generational awareness, generational study, is definitely not an exact science. And so depending on which generational expert you research or hear if they're speaking, the cutoff years will vary between the generations. And sometimes those cutoff years, that demarcation line between one generation and the next, can be as wide as 8 years difference depending on which expert you're reading. So I just wanted to point that out, that the cusp is very large for the generations. And so some folks, when they're reading, will find that they're in a baby boomer generation, and then if they go to another expert, they'll find they're in Generation X. And so if we're aware of that lack of exact science, I think it helps understanding about the generations and why we see some differences more markedly than others. Another thing that I wanted to emphasize from the beginning is that generations are really about general observations. And so it can be a slippery slope if we start applying the label of a millennial or Generation Y person to explain an individual's every action or decision. And so these are the generations, the study of generations is really to provide more of a general pattern of behavior that you might see based on when somebody was born and the life events that they experienced, particularly at a younger age, which we call helping them with their mindset. So it's a mindset event, and that helps establish kind of how they view the world and how they view their place in the world. For example, generation characteristics are based on common trends and experiences. And so we're going to take it as a general guide, not an absolute, but we can look at one generation. I'll give you an example of the Kennedy tragedy. So if we talk to a baby boomer about the Kennedy tragedy, usually the first association that that individual makes is with the assassination of the president. If we mention the Kennedy tragedy to a millennial, usually the first association they make is the airplane crash. And so those common words, common phrases, or experiences that two people might think they have can mean very different things. And that can be misunderstanding and miscommunication in the workplace. And that's can really impact how effective or productive a team can be when they're working together. Another is the Berlin Wall. For baby boomers, the Berlin Wall was a very large and impactful statement on the world. For millennials, they're not really sure what the Berlin Wall is necessarily. It was never a wall for their lifetime. And so that really can change the way they view the world and the way they work with other people in that world. When we don't understand the generations and the impact, that can severely impede getting our work done. And the tangible rewards for leaders when they do build their generational awareness is smoother working teams, less conflict, and higher morale. So let's go to slide 3 and take a little bit closer look at generations in the workplace. As I mentioned before, we have 4 generations in the workplace. The 5th generation, we maybe see 1 or 2 employees out of several thousand. And so that 5th generation is just beginning to enter the workplace, and we don't know as much about them as we do the 4 preceding generations. And so that's why I'll focus on those 4. Never before in history has so much attention been paid to the differences between the generations. And as that societal awareness continues to rise, we find more and more workplace issues being attributed to generational differences. And that may or may not be true. So again, we want to watch the labels that we place on whether or not it's a generational issue, or if it's simply 2 people who maybe don't really work very well together. Sometimes that's what we're really looking at, as opposed to a root cause coming from generational differences. What we do know is that understanding generations is a survival tool for managers who are facing an increasing number of conflicts and challenges in the workplace. For example, there are many supervisors now who are younger than their direct reports, and that's becoming more and more the workplace norm. As that happens, as that shift in authority occurs, we are seeing some direct reports or employees responding well to that, some responding negatively, and we're seeing some of our younger supervisors faced with certain types of pushback from employees or expectations from employees that they simply are not equipped or trained to deal with yet. Another thing that we're seeing with this multiple generation workforce is a steady rise in age-related conflicts that also are including more lawsuits. And so we're seeing higher turnover, we're seeing lost productivity, and we're even seeing an increase in grievances and complaints about age in the workplace and generation. We think they're stemming from some generational differences. And the type of age-related conflicts that are most common are work assignments, behavioral misinterpretations. Is it an order or was it a request, for example? Protocols and unmet expectations. We're also seeing an increase in inaccurate work, which is kind of an interesting byproduct, particularly in terms of the written word and grammar and what is appropriate spelling and grammatical polish before a report is considered finalized. We're seeing in our millennials much less emphasis on proper grammar, proper spelling. We're seeing a lot stronger emphasis on content. If the point came across, it's okay that there were typographical errors in something. So if we go to the next slide, slide 4, here's a quick preview of the generations that we're currently working with. And I've actually listed 6 generations because I think it's important to look ahead and think about what's coming down the road. So we have our first generations are the traditionalists. They're also known as the builders. They were building after they were growing up during the building after World War II. They're also called the veterans generation and the silent generation. Next, we have our baby boomers or boomers. They're also been called the me generation. And baby boomers, they're one of the largest generations we've ever had in the workforce. There's 78 million of them. And as the boomers have come through, some generational experts have actually split them into 2 different generations. The big boomer and the late boomer generation. Generation X comes next and has also been called the lost generation or the latchkey generation. And then we have Gen Y and our millennials, which is our largest population now, 80 million millennials, so they're larger than the baby boomers. They've also been called the nexters. And then we have Generation Z, or the net generation. And Gen Z, we have, as I mentioned before, just a few people entering the workforce there. So there's an idea of the different generations and the names that they go by. There is no official group that names the generations. The generational experts who are studying them send names out there for generations, and then it's whatever becomes the most popular is what the generation winds up being called. So it's more of a societal decision on what that name will be. So if we go to slide 5, you can see what this means for the workplace. What do these generations really mean? Well, I really like this hourglass graph because I think it shows how the United States is being squeezed right now. So we have this large baby boomer generation. They've been in the workforce for anywhere from 30 to 50 years. And because they were a large generation, they typically had majority vote. And so a lot of the workplace cultures and behaviors and norms that we see were actually set by the baby boomers. And then we have this very small generation, Generation X, that kind of came up in the wake of the boomers and basically grew up in a world where the boomers always had the biggest say. And so they've kind of just bided their time, if you will. And then you've got your echo boomers or your Gen Y folks. And the Gen Y folks are as big, a little bit bigger than the baby boomers, and they're coming along ready to change the world. But they may not have that depth of experience that we're looking for. And so if you look at the impact that the generations are having, what most generational experts say is that the Generation Y is going to completely revamp the way the world of work operates. They're just going to be, as more and more boomers retire, we're going to see Generation Y really taking over the workplace. And there's some consternation about that because Generation Y hasn't had as much experience. They're not as seasoned in the workplace. They haven't been exposed to as many different situations. And it's one of the examples or analogies that I've heard that I think is really accurate is it's like a basketball team. So our boomers are our starting 5 varsity basketball team. And our millennials are our junior varsity C team. And basically what's happening is as our boomers retire, we don't have enough Gen Xers to step into that role. And we're seeing our starting 5 basketball players being replaced by our junior varsity team. And so while the potential is certainly there, we're just not seeing that same organizational savvy and experience that we see with our boomers. So let's look at the generations in more detail, and then we'll discuss how that's impacting the workforce. So if we go to slide 6, this is a brief chart, and I encourage you to download the PowerPoint so you can look at this in more detail. But what this chart does is it breaks out the 4 largest generations in the workplace, and it shows you what their mindset events were. So remember we discussed mindset are the big happenings in the world that really affect how an individual growing up views the world and their role in the world. And from these mindset events come some basic core values that we see in the majority of a generation. So for example, millennials or Gen Y, they are very much focused on collaboration and working together, doing things in teams. Gen X is used to basically being on their own. They were the latchkey kids. They raised themselves. They taught themselves how to cook. They managed their own time. They're still very independent, but they do believe in having fun. And then you've got your baby boomers who are very interested in understanding what's happening and making a difference in the world. That's something boomers share with millennials. Both of these large generations really want to make a difference. And then we have our traditionalists with a very strong work ethic who are very comfortable with a more structured and clear authoritarian environment. So Gen Y is going to insist on the work-life balance. And they're not as willing to sacrifice for work as their counterparts in the boomer generations were. Gen X, really wants to have significant tangible rewards. And baby boomers are valuing creativity and personal fulfillment. And so those are important motivators behind our generations. So if we go to page 7, very quickly, I wanted to show you what our DOT and PF workforce looks like here in Alaska. In the spring of 2011, you can see our breakdown in the blue bars on the chart. And in the spring of 2014, our breakdown is in the red bars. What is very surprising to us here is how steady our baby boomer population is holding in our department, because we are receiving a lot of retirement notices. So we've had a large percentage of our baby boomers retire. When we dug a little deeper, what we learned is that where we are keeping steady on our boomer generation is that we are being seen as a good employer for a second or third career. So if we have boomers who, for instance, already have a full retirement from the military or from the federal government, now they're not ready to retire, but they wanted a change, they're coming to work for us at DOT. And so that's important for us to recognize, is that the average age of our new hires is 46 right now. And so that definitely is playing a role on the makeup of our department. And then if you go to the next slide, 8, you can see if you compare the DOT workforce to the U.S. labor workforce, again, in blue is DOT and PF, we are extremely high, significantly high in our baby boomers and in our Gen Xers. What that means to us is this continued mismatch is that while we are very fortunate in having quite a few boomer employees who have a lot of experience and institutional knowledge, when they do retire, we will have a very difficult time filling the gap of experience. We'll be able to fill the positions, but we will not be able to necessarily bridge that gap in experience. And so that's important for us to know for two reasons. It helps us plan for what our workforce needs to look like in the future, but it also tells us what our organizational culture will be like today, because the generations do have a big impact on organizational culture. So let's go deeper into boomers. If we go to slide 9, here are some things to think about when we're looking at boomers in the workplace. Because it was such a large generation, many boomers grew up where there simply wasn't enough room for them. So in public school, there weren't enough chairs, there weren't enough books. And as a result of that, many boomers grew up understanding that if they wanted something, they had to go fight for it, because there was going to be a huge group of people also fighting for that same thing. There was a very, very strong competitive experience growing up, going through school, getting educations, getting jobs. And one thing that we find boomers tend to do is they focus on a path. They find a direction. That's the direction they go. They don't change from that direction. They just power through to get there. So if we go to page 10 or slide 10 and look at things to consider about Xers, let's compare boomers and Xers. Well, Xers grew up where institutions were failing. For example, divorce was on the rise. Again, we had many couples that were a double income family, and so there were these latchkey kids who didn't see the standard family unit where one parent was home. There weren't always family dinners held around the table. There were a lot of corporate layoffs. There were quite a few economic impacts in the nation that brought the Xers to understand that they can't count on or rely on something permanent, that instead they need to make sure they've got a backup plan. There has to be a contingency, because they just can't trust that if I go to work for this employer, I'm going to work for that employer for 30 years and then get my retirement and be able to move on. And so as a result, Gen Xers are much more comfortable in a workplace where they have many options, where they're constantly playing their roles against several different paths so that they're not locked in and therefore may face failure. And so you can see probably right away how conflicting boomers and Xers could be, particularly in terms of strategic planning or planning the workday. Because we find that boomers will get on that path and be focused on the path for accomplishment, whereas Xers want to be juggling 3 or 4 paths so that they always have a fallback plan. Now, if we go to slide 11 and we take a look at Generation Y, now we see this multiple path concept, but we see a new twist added to it. And what we find with Gen Y is that they grew up understanding that something terrible could happen at any time. They grew up during 9/11. They grew up with the Oklahoma City bombings, with the Columbine shooting. They grew up seeing that there was no guarantee for tomorrow. And so they're looking for multiple paths because they never know when a path might close. But they are also wanting to live their life to the max every day because there's no guarantee for tomorrow. And so how that translates in the workplace is we often see Gen Y folks, they get a job and they expect that within a week they're going to be in the corner office. I'm here, you have me, now move me to the head of the class so that I can make the differences that I want to make in the world. Gen Y is also the first, if you will, to grow up with technology where it is instinctual. And that also presents a potential conflict in the workplace, because for Gen Y, they really don't understand being uncomfortable with a new technology or with technology in general. And they really don't understand someone who may need more time to study how to use a new software program. They just expect it to be intuitive and instinctual. And so that can cause quite a bit of conflict in the workplace as well. Gen Y also believes in disposable technology, and that really impacts the workplace because they're used to thinking of, oh, I've got a computer, it's 6 months old, it's time for a new computer. And many workplaces don't buy new computers every 6 months. And so we're seeing a real difficulty in recruiting and retaining Gen Y or millennials for places that don't provide immediate disposable technology. And so they either want to bring their own devices to work, or they want to go work for some place that's going to give them the latest and greatest in technology. And so that is really affecting how they work in the workplace. So there's a quick rundown of the 4 different generations. And if we go to slide 12, Amanda has a short video to show you.
Hi, everyone. So this is going to be something a little new that we haven't done before, but you'll see a new menu pop up. There are several links for this presentation. The first one that we're going to watch now is called Generation. If your browser doesn't open up to play the video, then go ahead and copy that link in the Browse To box to watch. It's about 2 minutes long.
By working really long hours. I don't really feel like I need to work long hours as long as I get my work done. I'm excited when my workday starts. I'm excited when my workday ends. I like to have meetings in person. I prefer email or voicemail. I've worked hard to find the corporate ladder. I should not be at the top of the ladder. I mean, I have a degree. I put in 60 hours last week. I'm taking next month off to go hiking in Malaysia. I have a sense of entitlement. Oh, so do I. Hey. I like Maxwell Health. Oh, I'm very charming. I just got a Facebook account. Oh, Facebook, good for you. That is so 2009. I like competition. I prefer collaboration. I've heard of that. Oh, he doesn't know this, but I plan on getting his job when he retires. He doesn't know this, but I'm never going to retire. Now, come on, we really need to work at getting along. See, there you go with work again. That's what I'm saying. You have no work ethic. Well, that's because to you, working a half day means you leave at 5. You know what? You're right. We do need to try to get along. Okay, well, why don't we focus on what we admire about each other? Great. If you think about it, your generation invented a lot of the technology we do. Yes, but for you, it's come so easily. Well, only because we're practically playing video games in our cribs. Yes, that's true. You did have a different upbringing. So my parents are still married to each other. Yes, self-esteem, we thought that was very important. So we tried to pump your generation full of it, which is why for everything you've got a participation ribbon. You know, we could use a little more of that here at work. I mean, does anybody ever say, hey, thanks for coming to work on time, good job getting your work done? No, it's just like it's expected or something. It is by those of us with those work ethic. There you go again. Hi, I'm a baby boomer. And I'm Generation Y. And we're Generation X, and we're stuck in the middle of there.
Okay, Amanda, I think most of us are probably finishing up the video now.
All right. Well, I hope you enjoyed it. I thought it was a very quick and slightly humorous summarization of the 2 main generations, which is the baby boomer generation and the millennial generation. And then, of course, in the end, we find that Generation X is kind of stuck in the middle in that hourglass. So if we go to slide 13, we can see the cross-generational challenges. And leading and working on multi-generational teams is a little like filling potholes in the snow, which is what this picture depicts. And I want to emphasize that when we start working with Gen Y or millennials, when we start looking or feeling those cross-generational challenges, one of the things we should recognize is that it is going to be out of the ordinary because it hasn't happened before. And we should expect unusual reactions. And if we can find a little bit of the humor in our miscommunications and take that time to understand a little more where the other person is coming from, what we can find is that we're not caught off guard quite so often, and we're much more successful and productive in the workplace. And so I encourage you, when you run up against something thinking, wow, where is this person coming from? Remember filling potholes in the snow. It's an unusual activity, but it can be done. So we can definitely work inside multi-generational teams and get a lot of opportunities for excellence out of it. So page 14 is a quick summary for you of the boomers through Generation Z. And the reason I add this slide is that I do want to let folks know that Generation Z, which is just beginning to enter the workforce, is bringing with it this idea of we're seeing things fail. We are concerned about the economy, the ecology, global warming, and this generation is really beginning to look at not just collaboration, but also how do we compromise? How do we as a world continue to survive? And so they bring a very different viewpoint to the workplace. And as much as the millennials will be impacting the workplace, predictions are that Generation Z will impact it even more, because it will be looking at the workplace in the United States from a global perspective. One of the things we really need to be aware of, and it was mentioned in the video or alluded to, is that there is a new glass ceiling that has been created by boomers who are staying in the workplace longer. Our medicine, our lifestyles are allowing us to work until later, and we're seeing boomers enjoying working later. Many of them are actually retiring and then becoming consultants. And there's a new ceiling, though, and so Generation X employees are very restless, and they're moving around a lot, because remember, they're not going to have one path, they're going to have multiple paths. And if they see a block or a glass ceiling because of folks who aren't going to be retiring, Gen X won't stay with a company. They'll move on. They'll move to another place where they can make their difference and where they can have more impact in the workplace. And so because we're seeing this shuffle of employees, we know that we simply can't expect employees to stay in one place because that's the employer and they owe that to the employer. There simply is not that sense of loyalty, if you will, or obligation to stay with an employer for many, many years. Another very big difference when you're considering the generations is the definition of team and teamwork. Gen Y or millennials expect a team to have no leader. They're really looking at a team as a group of people who've agreed on a goal and they're going to go work for it. What we often see in traditionalist and boomer-led teams is that there is a team leader who then assigns roles to the other people in the team. And Gen Xers are kind of half and half. Some of them will have that team lead and some will have a group of collaborators. But that's causing quite a bit of miscommunication in the workplace, because when we talk about team and teamwork, we need to make sure we've defined what that team is going to look like and how it's going to act. And if we go to slide 15, what do we do with all this information? So we've talked about quite a bit of generational differences and how that can impact the workforce. Well, there are included with this PowerPoint some handouts, and I encourage you to look at those. One is a manager's guide, which actually says, take your generation. It's a grid or a matrix. You take your generation, and then you take the generation of whomever you are working with, and it gives you some ideas of how to present information or what is going to be important to that individual so that you can motivate them or make sure you're communicating clearly with them. And the other three handouts provide some guidelines for motivating people based on their generation, because we do find that the different generations have different motivators. And that's important because really what we're talking about in looking at generational differences is that we need a new way of doing business. And if we find that new way of doing business, one of my examples is, let's look at library services. So I'm getting an online master's degree. I never thought I would do that online. And it's been a huge learning experience for me. And the library has video online training for how to review or to do research for peer review or scholarly journals. And they also provide chat rooms, they provide webinars, and then they have, you can call certain times during the day, and they have a librarian on call that will actually walk you through the computer. But it's all focused on how to do it through the computer. And I think we're going to find that more and more that's what's expected in the workplace, is that it's no longer going to be stopping by the library to pick up information. It's going to be an email or a text message or a phone call that leads someone on their own journey of discovery. How do I find these journals? How do I do this cross-referencing check so that I can make sure I have the information that I need? And I think that in the state of Alaska, we have our reference library here, and they started an online service about 8 years ago. They got really active with the online service. And what they have found is that they have fewer and fewer open hours where people actually come to the library. Instead, most of their librarians are doing online or telephonic guidance, and there's really very little personal interaction now in library services. So there's an example of how we might see a difference from our generations. There's also, amazingly, a true frustration from our millennials when they need something bigger than a small bite of information. They're used to getting bites of information. So if you think about it, most Instagram, well, not Instagrams, I won't use Instagrams, but Vines is a social media site that is 6-second videos. Twitter is only 150 characters or less is what and you're trying for even less than that. You really want like 40 characters to get your message across. And so in our world today, millennials are learning to be concise. I mean, very, very short, quick bursts of information. And what we're finding in the workplace is that what they're not learning necessarily is the more in-depth reading and understanding for complex concepts. And so from a librarian services viewpoint, that I think could be something that would really affect how you might provide service, particularly to our engineers who are, maybe they're going to be looking at earthquake and bridges. And if they're looking for a 90-second soundbite, we really need them to be digging deeper and looking at a number of different types of soil and the type of earthquake and the type of bridge to really have the best design for a bridge. And so I wanted to share this with you because I think that's important, is the millennial attention span, if you will, is exceedingly short compared to boomers and Gen X. So let's look a little bit very quickly at work environment and awareness, and then I'll leave you with a couple more resources. If we go to slide 16 and we look at work environment, one thing I would really encourage everyone to be aware of in work environment is texting and social media. For our millennials, they expect to be able to use their phone at any time or their tablet, and they really don't see a conflict at work if they are watching March Madness on their cell phone at the same time they're doing work. It really does not strike them as an inappropriate use of time, and so we need to be aware of that when we're working with our millennials in the workplace. And office protocol, again, for our millennials, they're used to teams. They really don't think about personal space, and so it's not going to be as obvious to them that maybe they want to walk in the door and knock before starting a conversation. Or if you're not at your desk, it's not going to dawn on them that they shouldn't be going through your drawers. So it's very important to lay out office expectations and office protocols right away so that folks know what is appropriate behavior in the workplace. And the biggest turnoff for a millennial is the quote, "We're doing it because we've always done it that way." Millennials just don't believe in doing it in that type of, let's just do it because we've always done it that way. They're constantly looking for ways to do the work faster so that they can get the work done and then go have fun. And so those are important areas in the work environment that we can use to our advantage. Millennials can really help us find efficiencies, which is a good thing in our environment today, and particularly with our economy, but they also may miss some steps along the way. And so we can help them make sure that their solutions are thorough and complete. And then slide 17 discusses awareness. Raising your generational awareness can do so much for you in the workplace. And some of the things to be aware of are the way certain behaviors can be interpreted in the workplace. For example, earbuds. For a millennial, they're not going to think anything of being plugged in to whatever they're listening to, and you never know what it is. It might be rock music, it might be of War and Peace and an audiobook, it might be the news. They can be plugged into anything, and so we need to be clear about whether or not it's acceptable to have, these personal listening devices in the workplace. And wording is also very important, our framing. So in millennials growing up, there were certain words on the television in prime time that they heard that when boomers and Gen X were growing up were banned from prime time because they were not considered appropriate words. They were defined as profanity. And so I think it's very important, for example, to be aware of what an individual's definition of profanity is, particularly if you have a ban against profanity in the workplace. And also, millennials are not used to commands. They are used to requests and working together. And so the way we ask them to do work can really affect their willingness to help us out and get the work done. And then finally, outdated phrases. When I first started doing the Generations presentation, I used an example of personal workspace and Les Nessman in WKRP in Cincinnati and his masking tape along the floor to denote his office. And I had to take that out because only a few people knew what I was referencing. And so it's important to double check and make sure references are clearly understood when you're working with folks across the generations. So slide 18. One thing we're finding that is working very well is reverse mentoring. Typically, we think of mentoring as taking a seasoned employee to help a new employee. Now, with our millennials, we're starting to do reverse mentoring, where the millennials are mentoring our seasoned employees in things like technology or new software programs and processes. Slide 19. One thing I want to remind you is that regardless of generation, there are some other very strong factors in the workplace that can affect workplace health and how the generations work together. And one is bosses. And there's been quite a bit of work. There's a link for you to an article from the Washington Post about bosses. But what we found is that a good boss can help you live longer, and a bad boss can seriously impact your health. And so as we have these new folks in the generation coming into the workplace, we encourage you to be aware of your impact on them if you are the supervisor, or their impact on you. And then slide 20, which is probably my favorite piece, is the Beloit College Mindset List. If you haven't gone there, there's a link provided. I encourage you to go to this mindset list. Beloit College started doing this in 2002, and they provide a list of 20 to 30 items that have helped shape the mindset of the individuals going to their college. And I encourage you to go there and read some of those. It's pretty amazing. Some examples are, for many college students in 2002, they had never heard of an 8-track tape. for many college students in 2010, there have always been cell phones. And so as we see this rapid technological advancement, we're seeing huge impacts on how people expect work to get done and how they expect others to communicate with them. And then last but not least, our final slide, I just want to remind you that generational differences play a bigger role than ever in the workplace. And millennials are ready to change the world, but they're not always aware of the long-term effects, or they don't always focus as deep as we might expect them to. And so it's important to, if possible, pair baby boomers and millennials together, and you can get a fantastic work product. We don't know what's going to happen with Generation X. There's some belief that they'll surprise us all, and as more boomers leave, they'll play a more influential role on the workforce culture. And in the transportation industry, we're seeing a trend toward more contract management in government versus actual construction. And we're also seeing a surge in consulting as the depth of experiential knowledge in our government workers goes down as we have more and more boomers retire. We're seeing them getting hired back in a consulting role, and this is happening across the nation. And finally, I just want to remind you, in terms of technology in our Generation Y or millennial workers, they're looking for bites. They want sound bites and information bites. And so the more we can entice them with these bites of information, the longer we can get their attention and hook them into maybe digging a little deeper for more in-depth knowledge. So there you go. There is, in a nutshell, a rundown on generations in the workplace.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Amanda. A very interesting presentation, a very informative one. I'd like to throw out the floor now, figuratively speaking, to see if anybody has any comments or questions. I see you did get an applause there, and a thank you. While somebody might be in the process of formulating a question or comment, I guess I'll get the ball rolling here with the time we have left, Amanda. I mean, a very, like I said, a very worthwhile presentation, very rich in information, helpful information. I guess it has certainly had me already thinking about a lot of things. But just for the sake of focus and time effectiveness, I guess I did want to get back with you about what you were saying about the baby boomers. It really had me thinking about what's really happening right now in terms of the up-to-date status. I was particularly intrigued by the fact that the baby boomers just aren't going through the pipeline and saying farewell to work forever. There is, like you said, that situation where a number of them are coming back into the workforce in other capacities as consultants, that kind of thing. I guess one of the things that brings to mind, I guess I want to run it past you now, Amanda, is the whole issue of, I think succession planning is the phrase for it. In other words, making sure you capture that institutional memory before folks go off to Florida or go off to enjoy their retirement or anything. It seems to me that whole dynamic and that whole issue of succession planning has probably undergone some major revisions in light of what you were saying with that trend with the baby boomers coming back into the workforce. And in one way or another, I think that impacts what we do as librarians and research professionals. I just was wondering if you had any comment in general on that whole issue, whether or not there is even as urgent a need to capture the institutional memory, since they might very well end up back in the office again.
That's a great question. Thank you. And there is a huge upswelling for succession planning, particularly when it comes to knowledge transfer and knowledge management. And part of that is stemming from, as boomers do retire and they come back in a consulting role, what many employers are finding is that when they come back as consultants, they're not interested in working 80 hours a week. They're looking at coming in and maybe consulting on a particular topic, or perhaps offering their services 10 or 15 hours a week. And so employers are finding that there is still a gap in just getting the day-to-day operational work done. And so we're seeing a lot of push towards process documentation that is available through the internet or the web, or through some type of program that many people can come and access that information. And what we're finding is that organizations are starting to focus on managing their knowledge, and so they're bringing maybe baby boomers in to help fill out that knowledge. And then that knowledge is made available to others. So, for example, in our department, we have a software package that documents processes through workflow and provides links and training videos and cheat sheets and job aids. And before people retire, we try to download, if you will, all of their experiential knowledge into these workflows, so that it's available to anyone who wants to design a highway, or design a runway. And so we're finding that is helping us. It's more cost effective. It reaches out to more people who then can develop faster, and we're not relying quite as much on our consultants. But that is a long process to get all of those processes documented. And so in succession planning, one of the things we're finding, which is unfortunate, is that we may put a succession plan in place, but the people who we want to succeed into these higher roles either aren't interested in those particular roles, or they're not willing to wait until those roles come open. And so we may start grooming someone, and then they have become more marketable, and they go elsewhere where the opportunity is available sooner. And so it's kind of a balancing act between bringing in that information from our boomer consultants, and also providing enough promotional or advancement opportunity to keep our succession plan pipeline full and moving forward. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I do appreciate your addressing that issue. And I see we're coming down to about 2 minutes into the hour here. I see Julie Bolden from South Dakota has a comment here. We did DOT history from the interstate era to the present with SPR money to be published soon. Very interesting. So that'll be worth checking out there. Amanda, I did want to also get back with you about what you were talking about Gen Z, and I think you did do a little bit of elaboration on this, but you did make a point of highlighting how their impact on the workforce will be even, if I'm phrasing this correctly, even more significant than Gen Ys, which is considerably significant anyway. I was just wondering, what sense do you see Gen Z perhaps having an even larger impact? Is there a particular area?
What we're seeing with Gen Z is that they're looking at the world at large. And so what we might see in the transportation world is that if we had a Gen Z engineer, say in Alaska, who's looking at how to strengthen a retaining wall, they probably won't hesitate to say, well, let's see, how are they doing it in China? What's happening in India? And we don't always see that much cross fertilization of ideas and knowledge. And with Gen Z, they're more likely to look beyond the national boundaries for their research and resources. And they're also more likely to say, if we build the retaining wall this way, how will it impact another country? How will it impact the environment? How will it impact the community? So they're very broad thinking in terms of the ripple effect, the butterfly effect, I think, is a good way of describing Gen Z. They're always going to ask, what's going to happen on the other side of the world if I do this?
Very good. Well, thank you. And I see that we're up against the hour now, so we unfortunately, I think, need to wrap it up. I really enjoyed the presentation, and it's always something I could probably spend a few hours on myself. It's an important issue, and I find it personally very much a fascinating one. I did want to highlight that Mary Lee from Minnesota mentions here last summer the CTS LTAP newsletter had an article about the National Transportation Workforce Summit and retiring boomer issues. So that looks like a great resource. As a matter of fact, I've gone ahead and accessed the link. It does look very interesting. So thank you for bringing that to our attention. And I want to give a big thanks once more to our distinguished speaker today, Amanda Holland, for taking the time to be with us today and share her knowledge and insights on an important issue that is very much impacting each of our respective workplaces. Thank you very much again, Amanda. I know that it looks like you have been receiving some rave reviews here as I've been reading the chat function here. So thank you for taking the time to join us today. Hope you got as much out of it as we all did from listening to you. And want to wish everybody a good rest of the day, good rest of the week. The next TLR is scheduled for Thursday, December 11th. The topic will be Trusted Repository Certification in the National Transportation Library. Mary Moulton, the digital librarian from NTL, will be our speaker at that time. So please mark your calendars now and stay tuned for further details about it. And once again, thanks everybody for joining us today, taking time away from your busy schedules to be with us. And I hope, again, that all of you have a great rest of the day, rest of the week, and we'll be in contact.
Happy Thanksgiving. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone.
And happy Thanksgiving. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Amanda.